The Lost Queros cartel had ruled the Verde Valley for 20 years, through terror, turning peaceful farming communities into shadows of their former selves. They saw every farmer as an easy target, until the day they made the mistake of circling the Connor family's farm. Joseph Connor had spent years seeking peace, trading his life as a Green Beret for one of quiet labor. To them, he was just a simple man with calloused hands and a gentle smile. They had no idea that behind that weathered face lay 2 decades of lethal training and hundreds of successful missions. As black SUVs approached, Joseph's instincts sharpened. His family didn't know the man he once was, but they were about to find out. Trouble had arrived. The hunt was about to begin. Drop a comment and share where you're joining us from. If stories like this resonate with you, hit subscribe so you don't miss our next inspiring journey coming tomorrow. The sun hung low over Verde Valley, casting a warm golden glow over the farmlands. For generations, the valley had been a haven of peace, a community of resilient farmers who thrived off the fertile land. Yet, beneath its serene surface, the shadow of a long-standing threat loomed: the influence of the Los Queros cartel. Over the years, local farms had been gradually taken over through intimidation, veiled offers, and outright violence. Few dared to resist. On the edge of the valley, the Connor family farm stood as one of the last independent holdings. Joseph Connor had carved a life of quiet purpose here after retiring from his military career. The years of peace suited him. He had traded tactical plans for crop rotations, combat drills for early mornings tending the land. Yet the discipline and awareness ingrained in him never fully left. Joseph's daughter, Emily, was the modern mind of the farm, blending traditional techniques with scientific advancements. At 22, she had a keen intellect, inherited from both her parents, and a sharp sense of observation that her father had nurtured from a young age. Emily's morning typically began with a routine check of the soil moisture sensor she had installed, an effort to optimize irrigation and improve crop yields. Today, however, there was an unease she couldn't quite shake. She crouched by the irrigation system, her eyes narrowing at an unusual set of boot prints near the equipment. The tread pattern wasn't familiar. It didn't match any of their farm workers' boots. Freshly imprinted, the tracks led toward the edge of the field near the dirt road. Emily brushed her hand across the prints, noting their depth. Whoever had been here had likely carried something heavy. Her instincts, honed by years of subtle lessons from her father, whispered a warning. Before she could investigate further, Rachel Connor's voice carried from the farmhouse. "Emily, breakfast is ready. Come inside, honey." Emily stood, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Coming, Mom." She glanced once more toward the tracks before heading back to the house. The warmth of her mother's call was comforting, but it did little to ease the tension in her chest. Inside the farmhouse, the smell of freshly baked biscuits and coffee filled the air. Rachel moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, her demeanor calm and welcoming. Unlike Joseph's quiet, watchful nature, Rachel was the anchor of the household, a source of strength and warmth. Still, like her husband, she had an acute sense of danger. Years of living with a man whose life had depended on situational awareness had left their mark. Emily entered the kitchen, trying to push the unease from her mind. Rachel glanced at her daughter, noting the furrowed brow. "Everything all right?" "Yeah," Emily replied, hesitating briefly. "I just saw some boot prints by the irrigation system. Looked fresh, but probably nothing." Rachel's eyes tightened slightly. "Keep your eyes open," she said softly. "Your father always says to trust those instincts." Emily nodded, grabbing a biscuit and taking a seat at the table. They ate in relative silence, the peaceful morning interrupted only by the chirping of birds outside. Yet the tranquility was short-lived. Rachel stiffened suddenly, her eyes drawn to the window facing the front yard. "Emily," she said, her voice low but firm. "Come here." Emily moved quickly to the window and followed her mother's gaze. A convoy of black SUVs with tinted windows was approaching slowly down the gravel road. Dust kicked up behind them in ominous plumes. Rachel's heart began to race, though her face betrayed no panic. "Inside," she ordered, her voice steadier than she felt. Emily obeyed, stepping back as the vehicles came to a halt in front of the house. The engines idled for a moment before the doors opened. Men in dark clothes and sunglasses stepped out, their movements deliberate and intimidating. Leading them was Miguel Ramos, a man whose reputation preceded him. Known as El Halcon, or the Hawk, Ramos was the cartel's enforcer, a man who combined charm and menace in equal measure. Rachel placed a hand on Emily's arm, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Go to the back room. Stay out of sight," she whispered. "No," Emily whispered back. "I'm not leaving you alone." Before Rachel could protest, Ramos stepped onto the porch, his boots thudding against the wooden boards. He knocked once on the door, then waited patiently, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. Rachel opened the door cautiously but with a firm posture. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice steady but cold. "Good morning, Mrs. Connor," Ramos said smoothly, removing his sunglasses and tucking them into his shirt pocket. His eyes were sharp and calculating. "I apologize for the intrusion. My associates and I were hoping to have a word with your husband." "He's not here," Rachel replied flatly. Ramos raised an eyebrow, as if amused by her response. "Ah, yes, we were told he might be out of town. A shame, really. We have business matters to discuss. But perhaps we can speak with you in the meantime." "There's no business to discuss," Rachel shot back. "We're not interested in selling our land." "Of course," Ramos replied, his smile widening slightly. "We understand. But sometimes circumstances change, don't they? It's best to stay ahead of those changes." Rachel didn't flinch, though her grip on the doorframe tightened. "You've made your point. Now leave." For a moment, the air grew thick with tension. Ramos studied her silently, the smile fading as he realized she wasn't intimidated. Finally, he gave a small nod and turned to his men. "We'll be in touch," he said casually. As the SUVs backed out of the driveway, Ramos shot a final glance at the house, his eyes narrowing slightly. The message was clear. This wasn't over. Inside, Rachel and Emily exchanged a look of understanding. Trouble had arrived on their doorstep. The sound of tires crunching on gravel shattered the brief calm. Emily and Rachel stood near the front door, their unease mounting as the convoy of SUVs returned. This time, there was no slow approach. The vehicles stopped abruptly, and doors swung open in unison. Miguel Ramos stepped out first, his expression devoid of the feigned courtesy he had shown earlier. The rest of his men followed, moving with military precision. "Mrs. Connor," Miguel called out as he approached the house. "It seems your husband hasn't been cooperating with us, and that complicates things." Before Rachel could respond, Miguel gestured to his men, who advanced quickly. Rachel tried to close the door, but two men forced their way inside, overpowering her and Emily. A struggle ensued as Rachel shouted for Emily to run, but another man grabbed Emily by the arm. "Let go of me," Emily shouted, kicking at her captor, but her resistance was met with brutal efficiency. Miguel stepped inside, surveying the scene with a cold detachment. Now, no need to make this more difficult than it has to be," he said, his tone almost mocking. He approached Rachel, who had been forced to her knees by another thug. "I warned you. You should have listened." One of the men found the family satellite phone on a side table and smashed it with the butt of his rifle. Sparks and shards of plastic scattered across the floor. Rachel's eyes locked on Miguel with defiance. "You won't get away with this," she hissed. Miguel chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, I'm afraid you're mistaken. You see, Mr. Connor is currently preoccupied. He's being taken care of in San Angelo. He won't be coming to your rescue anytime soon." His words hit hard, but neither Rachel nor Emily showed fear. Rachel glanced briefly at Emily, her gaze sending an unspoken message of trust. They knew better than to believe Miguel's claims. Emily made her move, subtly dropping her tablet onto the floor under a nearby table. The screen was still active, uploading real-time location data. It was a small act, but one that could prove crucial. Her father had trained her well. "Let's go," Miguel ordered, his men dragging Rachel and Emily toward the SUVs. The Connor women maintained their composure, even as the cartel forced them into the vehicles. The engines roared to life, and within moments, the convoy vanished down the road, leaving the farm eerily silent. Several hours later, Joseph Connor was at a farmer's market in a neighboring town, loading crates of fresh produce into the back of his truck. His phone vibrated sharply in his pocket. It wasn't a call or a text, but an emergency alert triggered by Emily's tablet. The simple message read, "Location compromised. Intruders present." Joseph froze, his senses heightening instantly. The quiet man who had spent the past few years tending crops disappeared in that moment. His expression hardened, and his mind shifted into full tactical mode. The routine errands no longer mattered. Without hesitation, he climbed into his truck and sped away from the market, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. As he drove, Joseph made a call. The line connected after 2 rings. "Adam," he said, his voice steady but cold. "Joseph? What's going on?" Adam Riley's voice responded, concerned but alert. "They've taken Rachel and Emily," Joseph stated. "I need you to gather the others. How soon can you get here?" "Give me a few hours," Adam replied without hesitation. "We'll be ready." "Good," Joseph said, his jaw tightening. "We're going to teach them a lesson they won't forget." Ending the call, Joseph's focus sharpened. He was no longer the peaceful farmer of Verde Valley. He was a soldier again, the ghost. Joseph's truck rumbled down a remote dirt road, leading deep into the wooded outskirts of Verde Valley. His destination was a cabin he had built years ago, a place unknown to most. On the surface, it appeared abandoned, weathered wood, ivy creeping along its walls, but to Joseph, it was a vault of memories and preparation. He had never fully let go of his past, and now it was coming back to the forefront. He parked the truck and stepped out, the crunch of dry leaves beneath his boots a faint echo in the stillness. Unlocking the cabin's heavy door, he entered the dark interior and flicked on a small lantern. Dust motes swirled in the light, and for a moment he stood in silence, allowing the weight of the moment to settle over him. Joseph approached a trapdoor hidden beneath a worn rug. He lifted it and descended into a storage space, where neatly packed tactical gear awaited him. His eyes scanned the familiar sight: Kevlar vests, night vision goggles, custom firearms, knives, and a variety of field equipment. These were tools of a life he had left behind, but never truly abandoned. As he began inspecting and assembling his gear, his mind drifted to the missions that had defined him. He could still feel the humid jungles of South America, the dense forests of Eastern Europe, and the burning sands of the Middle East. His reputation as the Ghost had been forged in those places, where his ability to infiltrate, adapt, and vanish had saved countless lives. One mission in particular surfaced. It had been deep in hostile territory, where Joseph's team had been ambushed. He had slipped into enemy lines undetected, dismantling their defenses from within, sowing fear and confusion until his team could regain control. His adversaries had never seen him coming. They spoke of him as though he were a specter, something inhuman. It was a reputation he had neither sought nor glorified, but had learned to use to his advantage. He snapped back to the present, his focus sharpening. This wasn't some distant battlefield. This was his home. His family was under threat, and that was a line no one crossed without consequence. Joseph pulled out Emily's tablet, which had successfully transmitted critical data before the cartel had taken it. He analyzed the incoming location pings and security notes she had managed to gather. It was enough to form an operational picture: the cartel's movement patterns, their likely hideouts, and the vulnerabilities they had overlooked. He climbed back up to the main floor of the cabin, fully geared and prepared. As he secured his weapons, his phone buzzed. Adam Riley was on the other end. "We're in position," Adam said. Joseph gave a grim smile. "They think I'm still a farmer. Let's teach them otherwise." If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel. It means so much to us. Now, let's get back to the story. The SUVs came to a stop inside a remote compound, surrounded by high walls and armed guards. Rachel and Emily were dragged from the vehicles and shoved into a dimly lit building. The space smelled of concrete and oil, with barred windows casting thin slivers of light across the floor. Despite their rough treatment, both women remained composed. Emily's eyes darted around the room, taking in every detail: the number of guards, the placement of security cameras, and the reinforced exits. It was a habit she had developed under Joseph's guidance. He had always stressed that awareness could mean the difference between survival and defeat. 2 guards stood at the door, occasionally murmuring in Spanish. Emily caught a few words mentions of shifts, patrols, and keeping El Halcón informed. Across the room, Miguel Ramos observed them with mild amusement before stepping out to make a call. His departure left a tense silence in his wake. Rachel moved closer to Emily, her hand briefly squeezing her daughter's arm. No words were exchanged, but her calm expression spoke volumes. "Stay strong. He'll come for us." Emily nodded subtly, drawing strength from her mother's quiet resolve. She turned her focus back to their surroundings. The ceiling vents were small, but positioned near the far corner, likely an access point. The guards appeared overconfident, distracted by their belief that the situation was under control. Rachel glanced at the security camera near the entrance, then back at Emily, as if silently prompting her to take mental notes. Emily's heart steadied. She knew her father would act soon. Until then, they would stay alert and ready. The guards exchanged casual banter, oblivious to the growing determination in the Connor women's eyes. The trap would eventually close, just not in the way their captors expected. Night fell over the compound, casting long shadows across the walls. The guards patrolled the perimeter lazily, confident in their numbers and control. The dim floodlights flickered occasionally, their beams leaving pockets of darkness that Joseph Connor intended to exploit. From a concealed position at the edge of the compound, he watched and waited, his breathing steady, his mind calculating each step. Nearby, Adam Riley coordinated the diversion team. In position, Adam's voice crackled softly over Joseph's earpiece. "Start phase 1, Joseph whispered. A few hundred yards away, 2 of Adam's men ignited a controlled explosion near a cluster of abandoned farm equipment, sending a burst of fire and smoke into the sky. Alarms blared across the compound as guards scrambled toward the disturbance. Shouts filled the air as orders were barked. "Phase 1 complete. They're on the move," Adam reported. Joseph slipped through a section of weakened fencing and advanced swiftly. His tactical gear blended seamlessly with the shadows. Every step was calculated, every movement deliberate. He followed a familiar path, irrigation tunnels that ran beneath the compound. He had helped design the network years ago, when local farmers sought to improve water distribution. The cartel had since repurposed the system for smuggling, but Joseph knew it better than they ever could. Inside the tunnels, Joseph moved without a sound. His senses heightened. He could hear faint echoes of footsteps above him, as guards hurried to investigate the explosion. The chaos above provided perfect cover. At a junction, he paused, checking the coordinates Emily's tablet had transmitted earlier. He was close. Emerging from a concealed access point near the compound storage facility, Joseph observed his surroundings. 2 guards stood at the entrance to the building where Rachel and Emily were being held. Joseph crept closer, his silhouette melting into the darkness. With silent precision, he moved behind the first guard and immobilized him in seconds. The second guard barely had time to react before Joseph subdued him as well, lowering both bodies quietly to the ground. "Clear," Joseph whispered into his earpiece. Adam responded with a brief acknowledgement. Joseph entered the building, his footsteps muffled by the concrete floor. He navigated the hallways with ease, relying on the mental map he had constructed from Emily's earlier data. He encountered minimal resistance. Most of the cartel's forces were still distracted by the diversion. At last, he reached the locked room where his wife and daughter were being held. Joseph retrieved a key ring from one of the downed guards and quickly unlocked the door. As he stepped inside, Rachel and Emily looked up in unison. Relief flashed across their faces, but they remained composed. "Time to go," Joseph said quietly, signaling them to follow. Emily moved swiftly to his side while Rachel gave him a brief but knowing nod. They had waited patiently, trusting in his arrival. They're still focused on the diversion, Joseph added. Stay close. Rachel and Emily fell into step behind him as he led them back through the compound. Emily noted the incapacitated guards along the way, impressed by her father's silent efficiency. Joseph paused briefly at a corner, listening for movement ahead. 2 more guards approached, their weapons slung lazily over their shoulders. Without hesitation, Joseph darted forward, using the element of surprise to disarm and neutralize them before they could raise an alarm. Rachel whispered, "Still the same man I married." Joseph glanced back at her with a faint smile. Some things never change. They continued through the compound, Joseph guiding them toward the nearest tunnel access point. As they reached the entrance, Emily hesitated for a moment. "Dad, the cameras." "Already looped," Joseph interrupted. "Adam's team has control. We're ghosts right now." Emily nodded, admiration in her eyes. They descended into the tunnels, the oppressive silence pressing in around them. Joseph led them through the maze-like network with practiced ease. Behind them, faint echoes of distant shouts hinted that the guards were beginning to piece together what was happening. The tunnel exit brought them safely outside the compound's perimeter. Adam's voice came through Joseph's earpiece again. "Diversion team pulling back. We've got company converging on the explosion site, but they haven't realized you're gone." "Good. Keep them busy," Joseph replied. He helped Rachel and Emily into the back of a camouflage transport vehicle that Adam had positioned nearby. Rachel squeezed his hand as she climbed in. "You never disappoint," she murmured. Joseph gave a nod and turned to face the distant compound, now bathed in flashing red lights. He tapped his earpiece one final time. "Phase 2 begins now." He climbed into the front seat beside Adam and spoke with quiet certainty. "They thought they were hunting me. Now, it's their turn. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel. It means so much to us. Now, let's get back to the story. The silence of the night was broken by the distant sound of helicopters circling the outskirts of Verde Valley. Joseph Connor had begun his counteroffensive. The cartel's smugglers found themselves stranded as shipments disappeared, their routes blocked. Joseph and Adam's team had coordinated efforts to intercept supply lines and sabotage vehicles, leaving the cartel scrambling for alternatives. Joseph's next move targeted their finances. Emily had retrieved files during her captivity files that contained access codes and transactional data. Joseph handed this information off to a trusted contact within law enforcement. Within hours, several cartel bank accounts were frozen, cutting off the flow of funds essential for operations. Miguel Ramos received the news through a tense phone call with one of the cartel's financiers. His fury was evident, but underneath, a cold dread was beginning to take hold. "This is no coincidence," Ramos muttered, pacing inside a dimly lit office within the compound. "He's dismantling us piece by piece." Across the desk, Javier Esteban leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight. He had underestimated Joseph Connor. What had seemed like an easy acquisition of land had escalated into a calculated assault on their entire network. "He's not fighting us," Javier said, breaking the tense silence. "He's hunting us." Miguel's eyes narrowed. "We need to strike back. Send a team to his farm, burn it to the ground." Javier shook his head. "It's too late for that. He knows our every move before we make it. We've lost control of the narrative, and our men are panicking. He's turning them against us, making them believe they're already defeated." This was true. Joseph had begun a campaign of psychological warfare, spreading disinformation among the cartel ranks. Strategic text messages and intercepted radio transmissions hinted at false betrayals and impending raids. Low-level members, spooked by these tactics, started abandoning their posts. Some even contacted authorities, seeking protection in exchange for information. Joseph's tactics continued to escalate. He orchestrated a false ambush on a Venezuelan hit squad sent to kill him. Using misdirection and staged gunfire, he made the team believe they were surrounded by a larger force. The leader, Colonel Rivera, was left humiliated and demoralized when Joseph allowed them to retreat with a simple message: "Tell your bosses the Verde Valley is now a hunting ground." This message echoed through the compound as Rivera delivered it over the phone to Miguel. Ramos's hand clenched the receiver, his knuckles whitening with suppressed rage. Javier listened in silence, the weight of their situation growing heavier with every word. "We can't sustain this," Miguel finally said, turning to Javier after the call ended. "Our men are terrified. Supply lines are cut, and they're losing faith in us. We need reinforcements, but who's going to trust us now?" Javier stood, his composure cracking slightly. "We fight back, we regroup, and we hold the remaining strongholds." "Hold them how?" Miguel demanded. "He's picking us apart without firing a shot. By the time reinforcements come, there won't be anything left of this operation." Their conversation was interrupted by another phone notification. Joseph had sent another taunting message. "You should have spent more on night vision gear and less on bribing officials." Miguel's face twisted in anger, but deep down the fear was undeniable. The man they had believed was just a farmer had become an unstoppable force. The walls they had built around their empire were now a cage, locking them inside, with a predator they couldn't see. Meanwhile, Joseph and Adam regrouped at a secure safe house. The team shared updates on their progress. More cartel members had defected or gone into hiding, and local law enforcement was beginning to act on the intelligence Joseph had provided. Adam handed Joseph a bottle of water, shaking his head in admiration. "They're running scared. I don't think they've ever dealt with someone like you." Joseph took a sip and stared into the distance. "Fear is a powerful weapon," he said quietly, "but it only works if you control it. They're still trying to fight on their terms. They'll learn soon enough." Joseph stepped outside and tapped a new message into his phone. It was short but effective. "Phase 2 complete. Prepare for the final act." He hit send and looked toward the compound's distant lights, knowing that the game was nearing its end. His mission was no longer just about protecting his family. It was about reclaiming control and sending a message that would echo far beyond the Verde Valley. The cartel's leaders were finally beginning to understand. They had crossed a line, and now the hunter they had underestimated was teaching them a lesson they would never forget. The night sky over the Verde Valley was pitch black. Clouds smothered the moonlight, leaving the cartel's strongholds shrouded in darkness. Joseph Connor stood on a ridge overlooking the cartel's primary operation sites, the cotton plant, warehouse, and ranch house. His team was ready. Weeks of strategy, sabotage, and psychological warfare had weakened the cartel's grip. Now, it was time for the final strike. "Status check." Joseph spoke into his earpiece. "Diversion team in position near the cotton plant," Adam Riley replied. "Power grids primed. Just give the word." "Cut it," Joseph commanded. A few moments later, the compound lights flickered and died. Shouts of confusion echoed through the air as guards scrambled in disarray. Joseph moved swiftly, leading his assault team through a hidden irrigation access tunnel. Emily's data had mapped out the compound security points, allowing them to bypass patrols undetected. They wore gas masks, prepared for what was next. "Deploy," Joseph ordered. Tear gas canisters rolled across the compound grounds, hissing as clouds of white vapor filled the air. Guards stumbled, choking and disoriented. Joseph and his team used the chaos to their advantage. They moved silently, disabling cameras and cutting off communication lines. Within minutes, the cotton plant's defenses had been neutralized. Inside the plant, cartel enforcers blindly fired into the smoke, shouting conflicting orders. Joseph stalked through the shadows, taking down sentries one by one with swift, non-lethal strikes. He disabled a radio operator and took control of their frequency. "This is over," Joseph's voice echoed through the enforcers' radios. "Surrender now or suffer the consequences." Hearing the voice they had come to fear, several guards threw down their weapons and raised their hands. Adam's team moved in to secure them, cuffing and gagging the men without firing a single shot. "Cotton plant secure," Adam reported. "Proceed to Phase 2, Joseph replied, already on his way to the warehouse with another squad. The warehouse served as the cartel's main storage and distribution hub. It was heavily fortified, but Joseph knew fear had already spread among the men inside. He cut power to the building and disabled the backup generator. Darkness consumed the structure, amplifying the psychological pressure he had built over the past few weeks. "Did you hear that?" One guard whispered nervously as he strained to see in the darkness. "Shut up," another snapped, his voice cracking with fear. "It's just the wind." But it wasn't. Joseph moved like a shadow through the building, using the guards' paranoia against them. He knocked over crates and created faint noises to disorient them. One by one, they fell to carefully timed ambushes. Some tried to flee, but found exits blocked by Joseph's team. Within half an hour, the warehouse was under control. Joseph radioed his next command. Target 3. The ranch house loomed ahead, the last refuge for the cartel leadership. Javier Esteban and Miguel Ramos had barricaded themselves inside with their most loyal enforcers. Unlike their subordinates, these men were hardened and determined to hold their ground. Miguel paced nervously, glancing at Javier. "They've taken the other sites. We're next." Javier remained outwardly composed, but couldn't hide the tension in his eyes. "Hold the line, we still have numbers." Outside, Joseph's team prepared for their final move. Emily, working remotely, tapped into the ranch's security system. "They've got motion sensors, but I've scrambled their feeds. You're clear." "Good work," Joseph replied. He signaled to his team, who spread out to surround the ranch. Joseph took a direct route toward the side entrance. He placed a small explosive charge on the power junction and detonated it, plunging the house into total darkness. He then launched flashbangs through the windows, temporarily blinding and deafening the occupants. With calculated precision, Joseph and his team breached the house. Gas filled the rooms as they moved swiftly through the halls. Enforcers stumbled, incapacitated before they could mount any resistance. Miguel tried to rally his men but was tackled to the ground by Adam. Joseph entered the main room where Javier stood, defiant but visibly shaken. The fear Javier had tried to suppress was now fully evident. His empire was crumbling around him. "You?" Javier said through gritted teeth. "You've destroyed everything." Joseph stepped closer, his presence cold and commanding. "You brought this on yourself the moment you threatened my family." Miguel struggled as Adam held him down. "What do you want?" Javier finally asked, his voice hollow. Joseph stared at him for a long moment before replying, "For you to disappear." The words hung in the air, final and absolute. Javier realized there would be no negotiation, no redemption. His operations were dismantled, his men captured or scattered. The Verde Valley was no longer under his control. The nightmare Joseph had become the ghost they had foolishly provoked was now an unstoppable force of consequence. Joseph signaled to his team, "Secure them for transport. Law enforcement will take it from here." Adam nodded, hauling Miguel to his feet. The rest of the team rounded up the remaining enforcers. Sirens wailed in the distance as coordinated raids by local authorities converged on the compound. As dawn broke, the once imposing stronghold of the Los Queros cartel lay in ruins. Joseph watched the sunrise from a hill overlooking the valley. He exhaled slowly, the weight of the mission lifting from his shoulders. "They thought they were untouchable," Adam said, joining him. Joseph nodded, his gaze steady. "Not anymore." The weeks following the cartel's dismantling brought a renewed sense of peace to Verde Valley. The fear that had gripped the community for years slowly faded. Farmers who had once lived under constant threat began reclaiming their land, rebuilding homes and livelihoods that had been disrupted by the cartel's reign. Word spread quickly. The ghost had sent a message that echoed beyond the valley's borders. No criminal organization dared to move in to fill the power vacuum. Joseph Connor kept a low profile, as he always had. He preferred it that way. His role in the operation was known only to a few close allies and law enforcement, but stories of a figure who dismantled the cartel without a single casualty grew into local legend. For most, he remained the quiet farmer tending his fields, though now with a deeper sense of vigilance. Emily embraced her role in the valley's recovery. With her expertise in agricultural technology, she helped neighboring farmers install sensor systems to improve irrigation and crop management. Her efforts strengthened the community's resilience. both economically and environmentally. She often shared her father's philosophy with others. Preparation and awareness are your greatest assets. Farmers took those words to heart, fostering a spirit of self-reliance and unity. Rachel focused on restoring the emotional stability of their home, ensuring that peace truly returned to the family. Despite the trauma they had endured, her calm presence brought a sense of balance. She often reminded Joseph that their fight had been as much about preserving hope as it had been about survival. One evening, Joseph and Emily stood at the edge of their fields, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky blazed with warm hues, casting a tranquil glow over the land. "Think they'll ever come back?" Emily asked softly. Joseph shook his head. "They've learned their lesson," he replied. "Fear keeps them away now, but the real strength is in the people here. As long as we stand together, no one will dare cross that line again." Emily nodded, her gaze thoughtful. She knew the valley had changed forever. Her family's actions had inspired a lasting legacy of courage and cooperation. As the last rays of sunlight faded, Joseph spoke quietly, as if to himself. Some lines should never be crossed. The lesson had been taught. The Verde Valley was no longer a place for fear. Some lines should never be crossed. If you were in Joseph's shoes, how would you have handled the situation? Share your thoughts and this story with others. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.